Welcome to another episode of the Pediatric Epilepsy Podcast, where we have real conversations about the challenges of pediatric epilepsy, the importance of urgency in diagnosis and treatment, how to advocate for your child, and the latest research, strategies, and techniques. And today we get to dive into a new chapter for our podcast, and that's our new Care for Caregivers mental health program, designed specifically to help parents and other caregivers understand and cope with the mental health challenges of caring for a medically complex child. It's something that is near and dear to my heart because of my own journey with Michaela, our little girl Mickie, and her journey from the first moment that I noticed something was just not right with her to months and months of not getting answers, to doctors saying she might not walk or talk or even live, to her brain surgery that occurred a day before her first birthday, to this past Wednesday when she turned 11 years old and the day before celebrating 10 years of seizure freedom. I'm Kristie Griess, CEO and visionary founder of Mickie's Miracles, and I'm joined by my colleague and co-host, Dario Herrera, and our very special guest, Erin Fecske, a pediatric nurse practitioner at Children's Mercy, Kansas Comprehensive Epilepsy Center. Welcome, Dario. Welcome, Erin. So excited to jump into this with both of you. Let's start with Erin.
So excited. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here. Let's get started with Erin. You've worked for a significant amount of time with children with epilepsy, 10 years and counting, at Children's Mercy and before in the neuro ICU and PICU at the University of Chicago. What is the first thing that pops up for you when we mention caregiver mental health?
Oh, all of the things. I think as a pediatric person, we all come into this field knowing that we're not just working with an individual patient, right? We're working with a family unit. And so thinking about approaching that family unit and recognizing all the things that are happening is really, really important in pediatrics. But the things that, I think about a lot is kind of where on that journey are my caregivers, where on that journey are my grownups, and how do I meet them on that, right? So trying to tease that out and find out what I can do to support them is really big, because no one person's going to be in the exact same place at the exact same time. And multiple caregivers are going to be in different places. And so making sure that I find out where each of them are, right? And what each of them need from me, instead of just approaching them as, hey, everyone at this point in your journey is here on a mental health journey. And that's just it's not how mental health works. And that's not how anyone processes the challenges of working with a child with a medically complex disorder. Oh,
wow, that's a big answer.
and I know there's so many places we can go with that.
And it's intuitive too, because I know Kristie and Gabe well enough now because of my work with them through the years and spending significant time with them, knowing that their mental health response to the journey of Michaela, has been different at different times. Mm-hmm. Gabe handles it in his own way. Kristie handles it or has handled it in her own way. She's still handling it in her own way. Yeah. And the assumption that they would have the same experience just doesn't match humanity, right? But I wonder, kind of building on that, Erin, how do you start to approach that conversation in assessing the parents, and then by virtue of you assessing them and approaching them, do they feel the permission then to acknowledge that there's mental health stuff going on?
Mm-hmm. So as far as how do I kind of assess and approach that, I am a very upfront human. And that's just how I function. And so it works for me. And so I'm very upfront about spending a lot of time at that first appointment talking about not only the diagnosis and medically what that means and what our expectations are, but also talking about all the other things, right? I think a lot of us in the epilepsy community talk about the seizures being the tip of the iceberg. And so talking about all those other things and recognizing very early on with my families that this will impact you, right? That this might be your child's diagnosis, or somebody that you care for's diagnosis, but that doesn't mean that it is only impacting them. And so we need to be mindful of the ways that it impacts families. And so then I just kind of open up and say, some of my families tell me that they have trouble sleeping, or that they might experience anxiety or depression. And I find that if I'm very open with them about, here are things that I hear from families, they tend to be much more forthcoming with me about what they're experiencing. Now, that being said, not all of us are really in tune with that, right? And depending on culture and environment and relationships, you may or may not feel open to have that conversation with me or with anybody else. But I have to hope that at least by being very blunt about, this is a thing that exists that we need to address as much as we're addressing the epilepsy, then even if they aren't open about it talking with me that first time, maybe that next time they will be, or maybe there's someone else in their life that they're open to having that conversation with. So just opening the door. And like I said, I don't beat around the bush about anything. So I just flat out tell families, these are things that are not uncommon to experience, and try to open the door that way. And it's not just one-time conversation, right? It ebbs and flows. Like you were saying for Kristie, it ebbs and flows. You hit periods of seizure freedom and you have this moment of like, okay, I feel okay. And then something changes and that anxiety spikes again. And so knowing at the beginning of that journey that that's going to be a thing, I think is helpful in preparing people.
Oh, that is so true. I mean, that's the reason why I started Mickie's Miracles. I didn't have any guiding light when we were in the journey. There wasn't another child that I knew of that had what Mickie had, as a representation of what could be, even though everything you read was just horrific. At least if I knew there was one child that had made it through, then that would give me hope. But not having that, I just felt was just made it so much more challenging, because as you said, you'd have these highs, but not only did I experience anxiety, but I also just, all your hopes crash again. It's like you're almost like a roller coaster. You're going up, you're feeling like, oh, maybe we made it. We made it past her 1-year birthday. We made it to her 2nd birthday. And then you get to the top and something happens, like us over the summer, being told after 10 years of seizure freedom that there's spikes in her frontal lobe at night, up to 50, that need to be addressed, because how important it is for her to be downloading the information that she's getting during the day. And that just really crushed me. And I really feel like, okay, here I start over again. But I know that anxiety and depression are definitely things that families experience, but what are all the other things, or you're talking about this journey, what are the unexpected things that families, and not just with epilepsy, but with other maybe comparable neurological conditions, could expect that maybe are not something that they've had on the horizon or in their purview thus far?
There's a huge spectrum of what to expect and what people experience, and that mirrors, right, the huge spectrum that we see in neurologic disorders, but also in who we are as people. We know that caregivers of children who have been in the NICU, there is very clear evidence that they can experience PTSD. And so I think that's an important conversation, right? Because so many of us kind of put that in a kind of larger trauma, right? And don't think about these little accumulated chronic trauma that our families experience.
Yes.
So we know that PTSD can be something that our families experience. I think a lot about just the family dynamics and how those change over time with our family units, right? Because maybe you have siblings or you have grandparents, and the strain and the shift in dynamics when you're dealing with somebody in the family unit with a chronic disease and neurologic disease, right? Because as you pointed, you've got a lot of waxing and waning in neurology. And the unpredictable nature is really difficult. So that's kind of the other non-diagnosable thing, but the things that you see in family units, and thinking about even siblings taking on that extra responsibility and what does that do for them long term, and that extra stress. Sleep changes, I think, is a huge thing that a lot of us chalk up to the mental health side of things, but it starts from a very practical standpoint, right? The sleep deprivation and lack of sleep starts because parents and caregivers and whoever the adult in that child's life is, they want to keep them safe. And so they're watching them when they sleep, and they see all the twitches and the jerks that we all do when we sleep. And that increases anxiety. And so then you watch them sleep more. And then everything else just gets ramped up because you're not getting this restful sleep. And so then it becomes just a very medical problem of caregivers not sleeping, and that activates everything else for them too. So thinking about both the physical and the mental well-being for people overall on this journey, not just, as you said, not just the anxiety and the depression side of it.
Erin, I appreciate so much what you're saying, and it reminds me of a conversation that Kristie and I had. And, you know, just now is Kristie getting to kind of slow down and process some of the mental health trauma that she's experienced since that first day she recognized something's wrong with my daughter. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned sleep and parents watching the baby sleep and the sleep deprivation. But how about those parents who are looking at the child and thinking, you know, is this next thing going to end my child's life? Mm-hmm. You know, as a dad, I have a child who was diagnosed autistic at a very young age, thankfully. And his mom was much better about it than me, much more proactive than me. But I had guilt about that diagnosis. You know, is there something in my gene pool that I passed on? And then I had guilt about not being as proactive or as receptive to his, you know, as his mom was to the diagnosis, and really just saying, hey, he's just a boy and he'll figure it out and he'll grow out of it. And she was adamant about, you know, us needing to get help. And thankfully I acquiesced, but then I had guilt about not, you know, seeing that, missing it, and not doing something about it in a way that, you know, she did. You know, so there's so many of these things that kind of, I don't know, interweave to create almost a perfect storm that parents, you know, oftentimes aren't even aware of. And I have even, and this is something Kristie and I talked about yesterday, we have parents who ask themselves, like, I have a child whose life and livelihood and quality of life is being threatened every day. You know, my mental health doesn't matter, or does it matter? You know, do they even give themselves the permission to acknowledge that they have mental health stuff and that it actually matters? And Dr. Wagner, who you know very well, said to us, like, hey, it does matter, not just for the parent, but it also affects the child's recovery mm-hmm. and the environment of recovery too. So can you kind of speak into that a little bit? Because we have so many conversations with parents where, like, hey, my mental health doesn't matter. Like, it's not even something that's registering right now, but we're learning through these conversations that we're having that it doesn't just matter for the parent, but it matters for the child and the recovery too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is so familiar to conversations that I have with parents, right? That I'll bring up some of these issues or their sleep, and they're like, no, like, I'm fine. This is about my child. And the answer that I always give them is absolutely, it is about your child. And that's why we need to make sure that you as the caregiver are as healthy and as supported as possible. Because if you as the caregiver are experiencing sleep deprivation, if you as the caregiver are experiencing anxiety, depression, PTSD, guilt, any of that stuff, how you interact and engage with your child is going to be altered. And we want you interacting and engaging with your child to the maximum of your ability, not just for your relationship, but for your child's overall health and well-being too. And it just, I think it's such a parent and caregiver thing, right? To put your child's needs first and to say, I need to meet all of their needs, and it doesn't matter what it takes from me. But the reality is that you can't give from an empty cup. and I think that that's something that we all say, but you don't actually take it to heart and remind yourself that you have to fill your own cup before you can help support your child. If you're not sleeping and staying up and watching your child all night to make sure that they're safe and that you're doing what you can, well, then who's staying up and watching them all day? Or all day when you're also trying to stay up and watch them, your brain's not processing and isn't understanding all the information that it's getting. And so you're not going to be as alert as you need to be. And in that initial acute phase of fight or flight, every family unit goes through that phase where no one is at their best, right? And that's okay. We expect that, but you can't live in that state chronically. And so to help families recognize that like you are not functioning at your best capacity right now when these symptoms are high, then they can start to move forward to get symptoms for the caregivers better under control. And they start to see that relationship gets better. They're interacting and engaging with their child better so that then their child's getting more of what they need and helping their well-being as well. Because unfortunately, none of us live in a vacuum, right? I can't just like wall off my own being and not impact everybody else around me. That's not how it works. But I think in our heads, we all want it to work that way and say, I'll just take it all on, right? And that's just not how it works.
That is so completely true. And I think of it as energy. I was talking to somebody who was really talking about how we show up for our children and how it impacts them, even if they don't see us doing it. This person had stopped drinking alcohol. And what he had said was, even if my kids aren't seeing me drink it, they energetically know that I am, or they're going to feel that. And I thought about that and I said, wow, that is so true. And I think what you said, Dario, at the end, you mentioned, I don't think it even registers. For me, as a parent of a child with special needs, it doesn't even register for me to take. I do the things for me that I've learned that works for me, whether it be yoga or my meditation or my prayer, my medical massage, this and that on a weekly basis. But beyond that, I don't need to take a time out for me. But I do know the results when I do, how I show up, just the peace that I feel, the underlying peace. And I feel like I'm able to take on those stressors in a much more grounded place where I'm making decisions and not just reacting. So this isn't, obviously we're not giving medical advice to families, but if you were to give some suggestions of what families that you work with do to acknowledge their mental health and take care of themselves to be the best parent available for their children, what are some of the things that you come to mind?
I mean, the first thing is what you touched on a little bit, which is acknowledging that it's there, right?
Yeah.
And I tell a lot of my families to work through that with your child, because no matter where they are kind of in their journey, your child, they are at risk for these mental health concerns too, right? Now, parents' mental health and the child's mental health don't always happen at the same time, right? We see some variation in that, but we know that kids with epilepsy experience higher rates of anxiety and depression. So by the caregiver acknowledging to their child, hey, I'm experiencing these feelings, you're going to show your child how to help with some of that stuff. And so I do think that helps take that burden of like, well, I'm only going to care about my child, right? By caring for your mental health and showing them how you're doing that, you're giving them tools too. So I always talk to my families about like showing how you're doing this. But I think, you alluded to this too. You got to try a lot of things and see what works ultimately. And unfortunately that's kind of like treating epilepsy too, right? There's no, with some exceptions, there's no test that I can do that says like, hey, this is going to be the perfect fix, right? So we just got to go out and find all the tools and see what works, whether that's music for some people. I encourage a lot of my families, when the weather's nice, to get out and feel the sun, go for a walk, feel the world outside of you, to do things like physical active activities if you're able to, meditate, color. I mean, it can be super simple things. And then all the way to if you have a community, finding that community, whether that is a church and a pastor that you can speak to, whether it's a formal counselor that you can speak to, whether it is another parent, another family that you can talk to break those walls down of not feeling so alone, all of those things. And, I tell a lot of my families, it takes a long time to get into counseling. There is a lack of mental health access in this world, and that is challenging. And so finding all these little tools that you can do is helpful, but also going ahead and getting in line for that counseling service if you can, right? Just knowing, hey, this is a hard thing that I have to deal with. I'm going to be dealing with a challenge for the rest of my life. And so let's get a counselor. Let's help learn some formal tools is always a good way to just get in line for that, right? And if you
and you
have
make
the
a good
access to it,
point.
use it.
Make that appointment.
Yeah.
That's the first,
Yeah.
just make the appointment. And I'm in my head going, oh, I need to make my next counseling appointment. I haven't done that. Just have it on, those things. For me, what has really worked is just, I have chronic back pain that is inflamed when I deal with stress. Well, that's kind of a daily thing around here. So having that massage appointment every week that I just go to, and I don't have to think about, because even sometimes making those phone calls, like I remember being in the depths of it. I understand when people just, things start piling, you have the insurance bills and the doctor's documents and the mail's coming in, and all these things are happening. You have possibly other children that you're trying to, plus a marriage, possibly that you're dealing with. All these things add up. And I think, just like you said, just taking that one step and making the appointment, it seems so simple, but it really, I have found very effective, because then that's one part that I don't have to think about.
Mm-hmm.
I just know I'm going to show up, and I'll have somebody there on the other end to hold space for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love so much that you said, Erin. Sorry to interrupt you, but really showing your family how, acknowledging that there are mental health stuff, there is mental health stuff going on, and how you are dealing with it gives them permission to acknowledge, right? Whether it's a sibling, or whether it's a spouse, or whether it's, your child as he or she gets older, you modeling that behavior and treating it, very seriously and consistently gives them permission to do the same, and remove some of the, and we're 2022 and there's still a stigma and judgment and shame and all kinds of things surrounding mental health. And that's part of why we wanted to do this. We recognize when we talk to families that mental health is a thing. I mean, it's a thing for me. I don't have a medically complex child, thankfully. And I know if I don't do my group on Tuesday night, if I don't do my therapy on Friday morning, if I don't get regular exercise, if I don't get regular sleep, if I don't get outdoors, if I don't ride my motorcycle so many hours a week, like I start to feel different. I start to feel different. And some of the things, the anxiety and or guilt and or stress starts to kind of compound, if I don't do those things. Now, I can't even imagine if I had to worry about, is my child going to live tonight?
Exactly.
Or my child okay today, but is he or she going to be okay tomorrow? Or my child has been okay, but now she's transitioning, Kristie, from a baby to an adolescent to teen. And all the issues of life that really kind of bring that forward. And by the way, now we're seeing spikes that we haven't seen in some time, and we're having to potentially shift, medical protocol and treatment protocol, and see what that does to her and her development as a child. So I mean, my mental health is important, and there's issues there if I don't treat it, let alone if there's something underlying that is catastrophic potentially, and that is your most precious being threatened in some way. So I kind of, as a follow-up, Erin, if, yes, do those things, but I wonder if you could just like share one thing with a parent at home who's watching this, like one thing to impress upon them that it's okay to admit there's mental health stuff here, and to really do something about it, because not only is it going to affect their ability in being a parent, but it's going to impact the overall environment for their child too. What would that one thing be?
I think the one thing is to check in with yourself. If you take 1 minute, if you take 5 minutes, if you take an hour walk every day, but you have a moment that you check in with yourself and find out where you are in your gauge. Over time, that's going to help you do other things, right? But we can't do any of this stuff if we don't know where we stand and where our mental health is. And I think so many parents and caregivers push it off. And so they don't even have an awareness. Kristie, you mentioned having back pain, and physical symptoms are such an important part of mental health. But so many of us are like, oh, I have back pain because I'm lifting my child out of their wheelchair all the time. Exactly. And while that may be very true, that may not be the whole story there. And so if I could just have, if all of the families that I interacted with only checked in with themselves every day, I think that everyone would have a better awareness of where they stood. And then the next stuff would come, right? But you can't start working on it if you don't know how it's impacting you. And you can't do that if you don't pause for even a hot second every day.
Well, and I think that the first thing I thought about when you said that me time, the thing that I had to do when I came home, my daughter still had stitches in her head. And I recognized that I was experiencing PTSD in this one moment with my son. Going back to the modeling, I am a recovering perfectionist. My oldest son happens to be the same. And me just making mistakes in front of him really impacts him and teaches him that it's okay to do that. And I didn't realize that. Well, the other thing I had to do when I came back from this surgery, recognizing I had PTSD, was ask for help. And that was having a babysitter come in twice a week so I could just do a yoga class. Like a yoga class once or twice a week was the only thing that I could even mentally, it was just getting back to myself, because that was something I had done for so many years. And I'm like, oh, if I could just do that again. And it could be so many different things, like maybe just finding that passion, but that requires many times asking for help. And I think that is something that not just this community, but the world community, it has a hard time doing, asking for help. I can speak for myself, and I just want to make sure that I got it, that I'm taking care of it, that it's my child. And I had to ask for help. I needed to ask for somebody else to come into my home to watch my children, which required trust, which required other things, teaching that person how to care for Michaela. But taking that chance to ask for support changed everything. And I think that's an area that this community is really amazing at. I watch them. Dario and I talk to people every day. What you mentioned earlier, the coming together, the community, the talking about, one very important thing we do is just connect families, our warriors together who have similar situations, similar insurance problems. Maybe they're in the similar area, same hospital, familiar doctor. We'll connect them so they just have one other point of contact to say, you're not crazy, like this is really happening, and this is how I navigated the journey. But I think that's a really difficult thing for people to do, but I think it's essential to make it through this journey, because this doesn't just end where you go, you have a car accident, you go to the ER, you get fixed. Like, this is something we're going to continue to deal with. And I don't think we are not built, human beings are not built to do this alone, to go at this alone. We are built to be in community with one another, to hold each other up, to get through it. And I just wonder, how we can encourage families to ask for help.
I mean, yes, all of those things. I think having conversations like this hopefully encourages people to ask for help. I would also say just find one person that you trust, and you don't have to ask the world of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can ask them to drop off a dinner occasionally, or to take you out to coffee or something. It doesn't have to be this big thing to start. And I always tell my families, like, I am here to help your child, but part of that is helping you too. And so even if your epilepsy provider is that first person that you say, I'm struggling with XYZ, we can help too, right? We can help guide you to some resources, connect you to social work teams, connect you to mental health support teams, all of those things. We know a lot of our community networks. And so if you don't know who that person to ask is, ask your child's provider, because they're going to have some ideas to start too. And we're not scary. Like, hi, I'm not a scary human.
I know. Anything but, Erin. Anything but.
Well, I think that's a great segue into why we're having these conversations about caregiver mental health. When we started to look at, what big initiative we wanted to take on, we wanted to see what unmet need existed. And not just for parents of children with epilepsy, but parents with medically complex children across the spectrum. And we realized that, hey, there aren't a lot of resources for caregivers. There's a lot of emphasis, obviously, on urgency for the child. There's a lot of emphasis on access for the child. There's a lot of emphasis on what we can do to create the best possible environment, medically and otherwise, for that child to thrive, recover, develop, have quality of life. But, Dr. Wagner helped us understand that caregiver mental health is part and parcel to that environment.
Yeah.
And when we start looking around at, who else is doing this work and who else is having these conversations, there weren't a lot of answers to that. So it's our way of saying, my way of saying thank you to you, Erin, for being part of this. You're our first guest. Our first podcast was Gabe, Kristie, and me, really talking about the Griess family experience with mental health and how we created this program. And I also have to take a moment to thank our sponsors too, because they really stepped up to the plate and recognized the importance of conversations like this. And Jazz Pharmaceuticals and Norellis really were responsive to our ask and gave us the freedom to create a program that was going to be responsive to parents and going to be a resource for parents, not just today, but ongoing, because, our expectation is that this is going to be, around for some time, and we think mental health is going to be around for a long time. So really thank you for taking the time. Your body of work speaks for itself. And I know you could do anything in life, and the fact that you dedicate your time and your expertise and your energy to do what you do and to share your goodness with families and to put them on a path to healing, both physically and mentally, I think it's remarkable. And I share my deepest gratitude for you and how you show up in this world.
Well, I'm flabbergasted. Thank you. I'm just so excited to have gotten to participate with you all, and the fact that you guys are continuing to push the needle on this and have seen this gap and are saying, we're here, right? And we're going to open up our arms, and we're going to encourage everybody to help identify this, to work on it, to improve it, I think is just remarkable. And so I am so blessed to be a part of this and to get to help you guys, and appreciate the invitation, and want to see what else you guys are all going to do, and continuing to open this up for families. So I think it's going to be really remarkable.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was beautiful. I got chill bumpies. And I do have one last question. Do you have cowboy boots?
I don't have cowboy boots.
Okay, well, you better get them before we see you in Nashville for AES in December. We look forward to seeing you there, to collaborating more. And we just thank you for being on this episode of the Pediatric Epilepsy Podcast, Care for Caregivers program. We're so blessed. And we conclude this episode. And thank you so much for your participation.